Hey guys, welcome back to What Could Go Wrong. Gonna be doing my prediction tier list today. So, originally I had planned on making multiple videos to do all of this, but unfortunately, just between life, my work schedule, haven't been able to get on here and make the videos. So, gonna just make one mass tier list. First disclaimer, I am not gonna be splitting chapters by spec. It's just gonna go tanks, melee DPS, healers, and range DPS. All right. Next disclaimer, there is no meaning to the left or right. All right. Just because, a protection warrior is at the front of the A tier, that doesn't mean anything for this tier list. This is just predictions of where I think things are going to fall. I'm going to be ranking them in the order that they're on here. So now that that's out of the way, uh, go ahead and explain my rankings. So at the top, you can see here I have Metacomp or S tier. All right, so basically this is what I think is going to be the S tier specs, the best specs, and it will be in a comp for high end keys. I think that this is probably the first season in a while where we're going to have multiple options and we're going to have multiple different things played. All right. Next up is going to be the acceptable, the A tier. This is going to be the key, the classes that are able to push keys that are doing fine. You're not pushing the high end keys, but you're also not like capping out at a lower key. You still be in that range for higher keys. The OK tier, this is pretty much gonna be the classes that, like, your weekly keys, you got it, but, like, you're not really gonna be pushing. Uh, I would say OK tier is probably gonna be specs and classes that really aren't gonna see any play past really, like, a 12. I think, obviously, there's always going to be min-max players who can push past that content. I think that any class is capable, but I also think that your group requires coordination. It requires you guys to be able to talk. So I think a pre-made group, this isn't really going to apply. But I think just for the average player, OK tier, you could probably push for 12s, but that's about where you're going to cap out at. Next up is going to be the crap tier. All right. So this is basically the classes that like play it because you enjoy it, but like you're not pushing content. You're not you're you know, I don't really think that I think in a coordinated group you could probably push a little bit, but I think you're not really going to be doing very high keys at all. And then F tier or the not happening tier. I think that this is the classes and specs that it doesn't really matter if your group's coordinated or not. You're not even going to push weeklies. You're not gonna break anything at the end of the day. So I think that more than anything, um, play it because you enjoy it. Play it because you're doing solo content, because you're doing achievements, stuff like that. But I don't really think that the F tiers are going to be the meta tanks or healers or DPS. I don't think that they're just not that great. So now that we got all that explained, let's go ahead, move on, and look at Brewmaster Monk. All right, so Brewmaster, I'm gonna put Brewmaster into the OK tier. I think if you have a coordinated group, I think that if you have a healer who can work around your CDs, who can work with your rotation, I think that if things are working the way that you want them to and the way that they should, I think that the brewmasters could push some keys. I think that they could do well, but I think just your average brewmaster is really not going to be pushing much past the 12 if they even make it that far. I think it's very likely that brewmaster is going to cap out around the 10 range. All right. So unfortunately, I played brewmaster a lot in the season 1 PTR. I played at the start of season 1. I've done a little bit of PTR testing. It's just not that great of a tank, and I don't really think that they're going to break any records or really be a very played tank, especially with how Windwalker and Mistweaver are looking, which we'll get to that eventually. I just don't think that Brewmaster is going to have very high representation. I don't think it's going to be doing very well as a tank in general. All right. Next up is going to be Guardian Druid. So Guardian Druid, it's kind of hard to rank. I think they have the potential to be in a low A tier, but I think for right now, I'm just gonna put them in the B tier. They got a lot of rework, they got a lot of changes, but again, they also fall victim to what a lot of other specs fall victim to, and that's balance and restoration and feral just get more representation because they're just better. Pharaoh, which we'll get to in a minute, has had some changes. It is doing very well. Resto has the potential to be the top healer. I think that it's going to be close. And balance is a really good spec. They have a lot of utility. They have a lot they can do. But I think Guardian is honestly going to be a good tank to push keys on, but I don't think they're going to get the representation, and I don't think that you're going to want to take a Guardian Druid over some of the other specs. So I think that you're going to be pushing up to that 10 to 12 range, and then once you get past that 10 to 12 range, like you don't need a Guardian Druid anymore. You need a Feral, you need a Balance, you need a Restoration. I think that's what's going to end up happening. So I am going to leave them in the OK tier for now. Um, when I get to the other specs, if things seem a little bit different, then I'll move them up. But I think they could go into the A tier, but I think they're going to be a B tier for right now. Next up is going to be Protection Warrior. I'm actually going to put Protection Warrior up into the A tier. So I've seen a lot of testing. I've done some testing. A lot of people are pushing up into the 50 to the higher ranges. I believe I saw a video not too long ago about a plus 15 being done with a protection warrior. So that just tells me they have the capability, they have the toolkit, and they have the ability to really push up to the higher keys, but I think you will need coordination, which at that level key, majority of your groups are going to be coordinated anyways. So I think Protection Warrior, I don't think it's going to be the best tank by any stretch of the imagination, but I think it is going to be good enough that you can push that plus 15, plus 14 range and be okay. And I think that they will excel, especially based off of like the changes that have been made. And it is much slower now in how it plays, but like you have the toolkit to deal with everything. For those initial pulls when you first charge in and you're gathering mobs, if you get your tier set to go off, that's an extra defensive that can help you out. So I think the protection warrior is going to be a very good tank to get those high end keys done. Okay. Next up is going to be protection warrior or protection paladin. Excuse me. So I think that protection paladin, even with the nerfs, I think that it's undeniably going to be in a meta comp. So I think that the changes they made definitely hurt a protection paladin, and I think that it does take them down, but I don't think it takes them down enough to where they're going to suffer. I think that it balanced them with the other tanks. I think that the self-reliance that Protection Paladin already has, mixed with the tankiness they got in season one, even with the nerfs, I think it balances out that I think they are still going to be pushing those high-end keys, and I think that they're going to be pushing world first keys. I think that with the right comp, they're going to go into an absolute berserk mode, and I think we're going to see quite a bit of representation, especially given the position Holy Paladin's in right now, mixed with Retribution Paladin. They're both doing great. They're doing good, but they're just Prop Paladin is just better, and I think that the fact that they are just the better spec is going to keep them in the S tier. All right. So Blood DK is another difficult one to rank because I think it could easily go into the A tier, no questions asked. But at the same time, I also think that you could put Blood DK into the S tier. Here's why I say this, right? So the damage in and damage out, that is going to affect a Blood DK, and you're gonna have to think a little bit harder. But I also think that if you're pushing a world first key, I think that you can run in, get a smaller group, hold your CDs on the group, pull a smaller group, build up what you need to survive, and then you can push in and get your pulls. And I think that you'll be okay as long as your group understands, like, hey, I have to do small pulls to generate runic power. I need bone shards. I need whatever the case may be. And with the way that the tier set interacts with a blood DK, is absolutely insane solely based off of the fact that that cooldown, being able to get a double stack of your defensive kit as a blood DK is super huge because you're already a very tanky tank as it is. Arguably, without defensives, probably the tankiest of all the tank specs. And I think the fact that you can stack your defensives now, you can time them out. I think that you would have to do a little bit of research. You would have to have a little bit more focused gameplay. But I think that you could very easily be pushing top keys with a blood DK. And if you're not pushing the top tier keys being run, I think that you're definitely going to be holding some of the records. I think Blood DK is a very slept on tank in high keys because everybody's like, oh, well, I have to take all this damage in order to heal the damage back. But in reality, if you coordinate with your healer and if your healer knows, like, hey, small pull, big pull, I need resources, I need you to keep me alive, I think you're going to do just fine. And I think that you could push those high end keys. Next up is going to be Vengeance Demon Hunter. So again, I mentioned this in my main tier list. I don't like the direction that Blizzard is taking Vengeance. I played Vengeance all the way back to Shadowlands. I think the direction that they are going with it is not a good one. I think that they very seriously need to take another look at Vengeance, and I think that they could do a lot of changes that would make Vengeance just a better tank and a better specialization all the way around. Now, all of my biases aside, Vengeance Demon Hunter is going to be in the meta comps. I think that we're going to see a prop paladin or a Vengeance Demon Hunter taking the world first keys every single week. I don't think that there's any question about that. I think that both of those tanks are going to be phenomenal this season. I think they're going to do really well. They both have really good self sustain. They have good damage in, damage out profiles. The talents interact with the spec very, very well. Um, you in certain situations you are not going to need your healer for what you're doing. Gives the healer a chance to actually take care of the group as opposed to focusing on you. And I think that's really what we need from tanks in season 2 because season 1 has been so big on focus on keeping the tank alive, keep the tank alive, passively heal the group, keep the tank alive. And I think that that play style feels bad. And I think with the way that healing is shaping up this season, I think that healers are gonna be able to take a breath of fresh air and be like, okay, my tank is fine. He's got him. He's got himself. I'm good. And I think that Prop Paladin and Vengeance Demon Hunter are easily going to be the best tanks to take for high end keys. But I definitely, like I said before, I don't think that Blood DK is going to be that far behind. Now, all of these rankings aside and all of my predictions aside, every tank is so close right now that like you could very easily oh, there it goes. You could very easily play any tank and still do well. I think that even with a brewmaster, I think you could still hit those weekly keys. I think that you'll be okay. I think if you have a healer who understands how brewmaster works, and I think that is if your healer is able to keep up with what's going on with you, I think that you'll be okay. And I don't see a reason to avoid any of the tanks. All right. So, with that being said, let's move on to the melee DPS. So, I am going to premise this by saying this is not shaping up to look like a melee season. I have seen a lot of people talk about it. I've heard a lot of people talk about it. I've experienced some of it. It is going to be tough if you are trying to main a melee DPS. Now, with that being said, I don't think it's impossible, and I think that a lot of these specs are going to do very, very well. But let's jump in. So, Frost DK. Death Knight saw a lot of changes to Frost and Unholy. There's been some damage nerfs and there've been some damage buffs. But really, what I'm thinking just with the amount of mixed reviews, I think that they're both still gonna be acceptable. I think they're both gonna be options that you can take, and I think that at the end of the day, when push comes to shove, they're going to be options for a comp, but I don't think they're gonna have as high representation as what we saw in season 1. Now, if you took one of them, I think that it would be a good option, but I think that if you are gonna run a Blood DK, you're or if a Blood DK is gonna be pushing those high keys, you are never gonna see Frost, you're never gonna see Unholy, because they just don't have they're not valuable enough to bring in 2 of them, alright? And yeah, so next up is going to be Havoc Demon Hunter. Um, so I really think Havoc is going to go think with the changes and they fix that bug, which did end up being a bug, I think it's gonna put them I think they're gonna be probably in the C tier. I don't think that you're gonna see very many Havoc Demon Hunters, for 2 reasons. One, Vengeance being the better spec, obviously people are gonna default to Vengeance. But Havoc doesn't have anything that it brings to the group to justify the amount of damage that they do. So Havoc has the potential to do good damage, but like they're not there. And I think that a lot of these other specs are going to outshine them. I also think that Havoc lacks a certain level of tankiness that you have to have that to succeed, and I think that they're going to be in like the tens, maybe push a little bit more, but I don't think there's going to be enough representation. I don't think that it's going to be good enough to push those high end keys. And I can't see a world where a group is going to form around a Havoc Demon Hunter to the point of making it work. So I'm going to put them in the C tier. They're not terrible, but they're really not that great. So next up is gonna be Survival Hunter. I'm gonna put Survival into the B tier. I think that they have good damage. I think that their talent reworks I think is really good for them. I think what keeps them from being in that meta comp is really the fact that they have no AoE single target build. I think that at the end of the day, they need to be able to do good single target and good AoE, but the way their talent trees are shaping up, the way that they're looking, the way that everything interacts, looks like you're going to be AoE on one side or single target on the other side, and there's not really a good enough balance to do both. Um, I I think that they have potential. I think that they can push high end keys. I think that they are probably not the most tanky hunter spec, but I think that they are better or one of the better specs, but I just don't see a world where a survival hunter is pushing past like a 12 without a very coordinated group and a very, very detailed um, setup. All right. Next up is going to be Arms and Fury. Um, So I'm actually going to put both of these in the A tier. They're both doing very, very good DPS. I think Arms is last I saw, Arms was doing slightly better than Fury. But I think the playstyle and the direction that Blizzard is taking Arms really messes people up. And I think that at the end of the day, there's no like niche for Arms. And I think that when push comes to shove, you're not going to see a lot of them, but I think that they are a good option if you need the extra raid buff. I think that it is very, very likely that if you run a Blood DK, you're going to see a warrior in that group just because of the way that the classes interact. I think that there's a world where that could work. But I don't think it's going to be a very common thing. I think that it would require coordination between the Death Knight and the warrior, and I don't think that people really wanna take the time to get that unless it's something a comp that you've already been playing. I don't think you would start that just for this season. Now, with that being said, I think that we are gonna see more arms and fury representation than we will protection warrior. Um, I think that with the meta tanks being Paladin, Blood DK, and Vengeance, I think that we're gonna see a need for DPS more than additional tanks. So I think that we are gonna get more representation. But I definitely think that any of the warrior classes are very easily gonna be pushing up into the higher end range, if not in the world first range, right? Next up are the rogue specs. So I'm gonna rank all three of these and then talk about them. I'm gonna put assassination into the A tier. I'm gonna put sub in the S tier, and I'm gonna put combat really in the C tier. So assassination, it brings a good damage profile. It brings a good utility, but I think that it's being outshined by subtlety. Subtlety right now is popping off. They're doing phenomenal damage. They are a rogue spec. They're just the better spec. Um, I think that assassination could be in the S tier for certain dungeons, but I don't think you're going to bring an assassination rogue as consistently as you're going to bring a subtlety rogue. And I think the biggest thing that's changed from season 1 to season 2 for assassination is there is not nearly as many interrupts. So you don't need that silence. You don't need that vanish and stop the casting from happening. You don't need that anymore. And I think that that is what's playing a factor in assassination is that they are more of a utility than they are a damage profile. And I think that the utility that you need, subtlety also has. And I think that the damage profile that you need and want, you're going to get from subtlety, which is going to make them outshine assassination. As far as combat goes, outlaw, whatever they call it now, it is just not it's not worth it. It's not a good spec. It's not doing very well. It's very complicated to understand. Its timing is weird. It's just overall, I think that if you're playing a combat rogue or an outlaw rogue, I think that I think you're going to do okay, and I think that you could probably push into the 10s, but I don't see a reason why you would bring a non-subtlety rogue past a 10 unless it was for a specific reason and a specific fight in the dungeon. I just don't see a reason why you would. So moving on, let's talk about Feral. So I'm actually gonna put Feral into the A tier as well. Um, Feral got a lot of changes to the playstyle. It got a lot of changes and buffs to its damage profile. It is popping off. I think that the issue with a Feral Druid right now is it fights the same thing that a Guardian Druid fights. There's a Balanced Druid, and there's a Restoration Druid, and there's a Guardian Druid. You can take all three of those specs and still get the exact same toolkit, if not a better toolkit. I think that the direction that Feral is going, because it's what you have to play, I don't see a reason why you would want to jump on that train unless it's something you've already been playing. But if it's something you've already been playing, if it's a spec you already know, you love, you enjoy, you want to play, I think that you could very easily pick up a DPS spot. And I think that when it comes down to it, I think Feral Druid is a very strong option to take. But again, with it not being a melee season, not looking like a melee season, I think you're going to struggle a little bit more just because you are a little bit squishier, your cooldowns are a little bit different and you have to time them the right way. You're not going to have 100% uptime on them, so your damage is going to go up and down based off of pulls. I think that you could get in there and you could do really well, but I don't think you're going to be taken every time. All right. So next up is going to be Windwalker Monk. I'm going to put Windwalker into the B tier. They have really good damage. They have really good AoE, good single target. They've got new abilities. They're doing really, really well. But I think that they're going to be outshined by Mistweaver. And I just don't think that you're going to see a lot of Windwalker representation with how Mistweaver looks. which I'll get into Mistweaver more here in a minute. But I think that Brewmaster and Windwalker are going to suffer from that. But I think that you are going to see more Windwalker monks than you are Brewmasters. Um, I think it is very possible for Windwalker to push the high end keys. I think they can get in there, but I think they're going to struggle with getting invites, or we already have a monk. Why would I take two? I don't think that monk is good enough to stack the classes. I don't think there's a spec in the game that's good enough to stack the class, right? So I think a lot of where Windwalker and a lot of what's going to keep Windwalker out of groups is Mistweaver. Okay. So next up is going to be Enhancement Shaman. I'm putting Enhancement in the S tier. They are looking phenomenal. They have done really well in season 1. I think that they're going to do really well in season 2. I think that's been a very slept on spec. I think that it's done well for a while now, but I don't really think they got their chance to shine until season 1. And now that they've gotten their chance and they're out in the world and enhancement shamans have shown what they can do, I think you're going to see an enhanced shaman in a meta comp. I think that it's going to happen. All right. Next up is going to be Ret Paladin. I think Ret Paladin, it's just not going to change. I think it's going to get outshined by protection, and I think it's going to sit in the okay tier. I think that you could push that 10 to 12 range. I think that you're going to be okay. I think that you'll be able to get into groups, but I don't think you're going to push past it because one, you're going to have protection paladins, and even if you don't have a protection paladin in the group, I just don't think that the damage and the utility is enough to bring ret unless you're just grabbing an extra DPS. You know, if it's one of those like, hey, I just need to do this 13 because I need the volt slot for it because of whatever reason. I think that's when Rhett would get the invites, but I don't think they're going to be there on a regular basis past a 12. So that's where what we're looking at for Melee. Uh, like I said, doesn't look like a very Melee friendly season, but at the same time, a lot of potential for Melee DPS. I think that the balancing is not quite as good as the tank specs, but I think that the balancing between the Melee DPS is pretty good. I think that some of these B and C tiers could use a second look just to get them up a little bit higher. But I think in general, I think they're okay. All right. Next up, we will get into the healers. So, healer balancing is not nearly as good as what you are looking at with the tanks or any of the DPS. I think healer balancing is probably among the worst. Um, I've been looking at different healers because I am considering healing for season 2 because I like the way that it's looking. But I think that you are very limited in what healers you can play. So Restoration Shaman, we saw them do really, really well at the beginning of the season. We saw them doing really well, but unfortunately, they have fallen. They're going to go in the B tier. I think that you can bring them to push those 10 to 12 keys. I think if you coordinate it out, you can go higher, but I don't think we're going to see Restoration Shaman very much just because it's outshined by both enhancement and elemental. But I think more than anything, it's just not strong enough and it has too many mana problems to be taken on a consistent and regular basis. Next up is going to be a Holy Priest. Holy Priest is actually going to go into the B tier as well. I think that with a coordinated group, you would do really well. I think that for your just weekly keys, you'll do really well. But I think if you're pugging, if you're an LFG, as a holy priest, you're not really pushing past a 10. I think that's really where you're going to cap out as a holy priest. I think that there's always a potential to get those 11s and 12s done, but I just don't see a world where holy priest is popping off and pushing past the 12 point, especially with how discipline looks. I just don't see a reason why. I don't see a reason why they would be taken. Um, Not sure how it got rearranged, but Discipline is going to go into the S tier. Discipline is still looking very strong. They got some nerfs the other day. Doesn't seem to have slowed them down. changed up their rotation a little bit, changed up their play style a little bit, but it is not slowing them down. It's not doing anything to hurt them, and I think that they are still going to be taken. All right. Next up is going to be Restoration Druid. So I think that all of the Druid specs are going to suffer from this, but I see Resto Druid being in the S tier. The way that they interact with tanks, the way that they heal, and the way that everything is looking, the power that they have, the way their force set interacts, I think that Resto Druid has the potential to be pushing highest of contents all the way around. I think that when it comes right down to it, I think that the way Restoration Druid interacts with Demon Hunter is going to be amazing. I think the way Resto Druid interacts with a Blood DK is going to make it really, really, really good, and it's going to excel. Um, Personally, I haven't seen much interaction between a Prot Paladin and a Restoration Druid, so I can't really speak too much to that. But I would imagine that just the way that Druid heals and the way that Paladin mitigates damage, I think that there is a lot of potential to see Resto Druid in those high end keys, especially given the changes to Discipline. All right. Next up is Mistweaver Monk. So Mistweaver is also going to go in the S tier. I think that the toolkit and the playstyle and the healing buffs and the way that they heal, I think is going to make Mistweaver arguably one of the best healers this season. I think it's going to be a very close race between these three specs. I think that when you look at everything, the output that you get from a Mistweaver Monk is just you cannot argue with the numbers that they put up. I think that Mistweaver is probably going to fall off in the highest of high keys, depending on the group. But at the same time, I think that they still have the potential to be in those high end keys, especially if the self sustain that your tank and group has, it is way too easy to bring a Mistweaver and make it work. All right. Next up is going to be Evoker. Um, I think Evoker is going to go in the not happening category. I think that Evoker, from the videos I've seen and from what I've heard people talking, their output is still requiring the group to be coordinated, which takes LFG out and needs everybody to be grouped up. But there's a lot of different times when you need to spread out, and I don't think that a restoration, a restoration. Wow, I don't think that a preservation evoker is good enough to make it into those keys. I think if you're just doing everyday keys, it'll work. I think if you have a coordinated group, it'll work. But even their ramp is just not. It's not great. All right. Um, Next up, Holy Paladin. Unfortunately, I was fighting so hard to play a paladin in season 2 as a healer, but Holy Paladin goes into the F tier as well. I don't think you're going to see any representation of Holy Paladin because it is outshined by Retribution, it is outshined by Protection, and it is not a good healer. Historically, Holy Paladin has been a very slept on healer. Even in season 1, I used to love getting Holy Paladins because like the healing that they could do and the abilities that they had, like the way it interact, especially playing a Prot Warrior, it was just amazing. But Blizzard is taking it into like a confusing, like you need to hard cast, but you need a hard cast in melee range. You have to do damage, but like you can't do damage and you have to get away and then get back in and you run out, hard cast, run back in. It's just too much going on, and I don't think that Holy Paladin is going to be doing anything anything great at all this season. So that's where we're gonna rank our healers. I am gonna go ahead and move into the range DPS. So starting off with warlocks. I think that Affliction is gonna go into the A tier. I think Destruction is gonna go in the S tier, and I think that as a result, Demonology is C tier. I think Demonology is a good spec to play. I think it'll still do good damage. It'll still be able to make those high keys, but I think that you're not gonna see it in the high keys, and nobody's gonna want to take it in the high keys because it will be outshined by Destruction and Affliction. As it stands right now, last I saw, Destruction is doing slightly better than Affliction. That is the only reason why they are separated out like that. I think that Affliction is a very good spec. I think that it has the potential to be a great spec, but I think that Destruction just does more damage. And I think that's what people are going to want because you can get the Warlock utility from any of the specs. So, really, what separates them is going to be your damage profile, and I think the damage profile is slightly better on Destruction. So unfortunately, that means that Destro does take the S tier spot. However, I think that if Destruction does get any nerfs at any point in time, I think Affliction is going to be taking the S tier spot, and I think that if the damage profile plays out to be better, I think that Affliction is going to be higher than Destruction. All right. So next up are the mage specs. So I am going to put Arcane and Frost into A tier and Fire into S tier. I think that no matter what happens, there's going to be a mage. But same situation with a Warlock. You're going to take Fire because Fire has the better survivability. It has a mage toolkit. It has a little bit more tankiness, cheat death. It's got slightly better damage. But I think that it could very easily be any of the mage specs, and I think that they will all three be played at high end keys solely based off of what the dungeon needs. And I think that you're going to see a mage, and I think that any of the three mage specs are going to get invited to higher keys. And I think that their damage profiles are just close enough to each other that it's not going to matter which one you really take. I think it's going to come down to which one can do slightly more damage in these situations. And I think that's what you're going to end up choosing a mage based off of. Next up is going to be Balanced Druid. So, everything I've seen, everything people have talked about, Balanced Druid is kind of weird, a little bit more complex to play. I'm going to put it into the B tier. I think it's going to do okay. I don't think it's going to outshine everybody, but I think that it's going to be all right. I think that if you have that coordinated group, if you have that experienced player, if you have that process, you'll push keys. But without that, I don't think you're getting there. So next up is marksmanship. Putting marksmanship straight into crap. The rework is absolutely terrible. Which brings me to Beast Mastery. I think Beast Mastery is going to be in the A tier. I think that you could bring Beast Mastery, and I think that they do the damage. They bring a lust. They have the toolkit. Like they are going to outshine, and I think they are slightly more tanky just because they can. They're not up there. They're not in there. They can get away from AoE damages. They can outrange a few mechanics and then run back in. Like they have ways of dropping poisons, and there are definitely things that Beast Mastery can do that the other specs just can't do. Because you can still do damage if you are out of range to actually shoot off your attacks. All right. I think that marksmanship is completely garbage. I think that this new rework that they did completely destroyed their damage profile. I think that their spec is too slow to keep up. I don't think you're going to do damage outside of your true shot. It is not looking like it's a good spec at all. It's not shaping up very well. I haven't seen anybody who's like super excited about the new rework. I haven't heard anything good about the new rework. So, next up is going to be Evokers. So I think that Devastation is going to be in the okay tier. I don't think you're gonna see much representation just because it's not the best Mythic Plus spec. I think AUG is going to be in the not happening tier. I think the changes and the way that it plays now, I don't think anybody's gonna want it. I don't think anybody's gonna want to try it. So, evokers are just they're okay, but like they bring utility, but like they don't bring damage. And there are other specs that like you can have utility with, but like it's just they don't have anything that makes them stand out, and they don't do enough damage to be better. So I don't think we're gonna see them. Next up is Shadow Priest. I think that Shadow Priest is going to be in the same boat as Demonology. I think it's going to be in C tier, and you're not going to see it solely based off of how good um, Discipline is. Actually, no. I'm gonna put it. I'm gonna bounce it up into the OK tier. I think that you have the potential to bring a Shadow Priest. I think that you could, in the event that you were running a comp based off of a Resto Druid and a Mistweaver. I think that Shadow would get a place, but I don't really foresee that happening. I think it would really depend. All right. Next up is Elemental. I am putting Elemental straight into the A tier. I think that any comp that does not include an Enhancement Shaman will include an Elemental Shaman. I think that the two specs are side by side, phenomenal. They bring very good utility. They have the shortest interrupt. I think that when push comes to shove, Elemental is slightly less damage than Enhancement because Enhancement has across the board. Elemental really does require um, certain situations. But I think that when things come right down to it, they will be in the meta comp. All right. So, but there you have it. That is the tier list for season 2 predictions. All right. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Remember, like and subscribe, and I'll see y'all next time.